Rupert Lowe just announced his new national political party, Restore Britain, yesterday, which aims to sit further rightwards than both Reform and the Conservatives, and it was met with, let's be honest, a pretty monstrous reaction in the online right space, right? YouTube and X right now is awash with celebrations from political figures all over the online new media space of celebrations, really. And Ben Habib's Advance UK, which previously was probably the second largest resurgent right-wing party after Reform, which was recreated again really as a rival to Reform, they've already announced their intention to merge with Advance UK, which is with Restore Britain, which is really quite a big win and will pretty much instantly make Advance UK the second largest resurgent right-wing political force in the country. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is the greatest thing to ever happen or that it's the worst thing to ever happen. I'm actually going to say that it's really hard to say where this is going to go and whether or not this is going to help the country. I think there's some good news here and there's some bad news here. There is obviously a risk of the right wing in our country fracturing as if we were, frankly, a load of idiotic socialists who care more about ideology than actually getting a decent outcome for our country. So I wanted today to try and put aside political allegiances, whether you have some, deep beset allegiance to Rupert Lowe or to Nigel Farage. I'd encourage you to come into this video with an open mind and open heart. That's how I've approached preparing this video, and that's how I'm going to try and approach, speaking to you today. I want to talk, frankly, about this new party, about Lowe, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, and also how we as just ordinary patriotic Brits who might be a member of Reform Party or Advance UK, but also might just want to see a better country and how we should be seeing this and what we should be looking out for in the future to make sure that we have as great a chance as possible as getting a real right-wing party into government. So I thought, first of all, let's start off literally just by listening to Rupert Lowe with his announcement video, and I'll give you my thoughts along the way and then a lot more afterwards.
I have chosen to speak to you today from the farm because places like this represent what proper Britain is about. Hard work, responsibility, effort, duty, stewardship. This is the England I know, and this is the England that I love. On a farm, you don't think in election cycles or headlines or polling. You think in seasons, you think in generations, in what you leave behind to those who come after you. And that's why, here on the farm, I am now launching Restore Britain as a national political party. I'm now going to dedicate my life to finding, organising, funding, and providing hundreds of qualified candidates to present to the British people at the next general election. This process has already started, with invitations being issued to patriots in aligned political parties, Reform, the Conservatives, the SDP, Advance, and more. In local politics, we will work in partnership with localised political parties, such as Great Yarmouth First, that have the best interests of their residents at heart, combining our forces at the next general election.
That alone, I actually want to quickly make a note of, is really, really promising to hear. One of the big issues that we saw with why the left wing was able to seize control over our politics over recent decades and why they ultimately collapsed was an unwillingness to work amongst one another, right? There were feminists who were, ridiculously pro-feminist, and anything that could be loosely aligned as feminism, like, oh, a bloke can cut off his cock and suddenly he's a woman, they were deemed the core of this voter base. And so women who were like, well, hang on, I don't really want a 60-year-old bloke, seeing me change in the local swimming pool changing rooms. Suddenly they were ousted from the left wing and they were pushed rightward. What Rupert Lowe just said there, that he wants to be working alongside local parties in particular, that's very, very reassuring for me. I would love to see real alliances and cooperation across different political parties on the right wing of our country, because if we don't, we will just end up going the way that we've gone over the last couple of decades, right? With a UKIP and a BNP and a Reform, a Restore, an Advance UK, and all these different political parties fighting with each other, splitting the right-wing vote and leading to, someone awful like Keir Starmer being in power.
The men and women standing for Restore in that election will not be politicians.
That's nice to hear too.
I promise you that. They will not be failed ministers. They will not be tainted by failures of the past. They will be from business, from the military, from science, from medicine, from education, from industry, representing real communities up and down the country.
That, again, is very good to hear. Actually, I know a lot of people who are big supporters of Lowe won't like me saying this, but that is actually very similar to a Reform Party policy that Nigel Farage has spoken a little bit about, the idea that MPs don't necessarily have to make up the entire cabinet within a government. You can have a normal person who is, let's just say as an example, run a big train company. He can be elevated to the House of Lords and then appointed Minister for Transport as an expert, and he's able to avoid a lot of the political infighting that comes with having to win a constituency and represent both the country on a whole as a minister and your local constituents on a local level. So again, that's quite promising to hear. Frankly, I'm going to say this a number of times throughout, everything in this video is brilliant. Rupert is a great speaker. He speaks with a lot of passion. It's a very emotive video. And I actually don't think there's a single thing I disagree with him saying throughout this entire video.
Every single one will be from well outside the existing political establishment, and every single one will understand the difficult decisions that need to be taken. Because there are no easy fixes. I'm not going to tell you comforting lies about the condition of our country. I have only ever been honest with the British people, and I will be straight with you now. What is necessary will be incredibly painful. But for the first time in a very long time, voters will have a genuine alternative which is truthful with them about the scale of what now has to be done. The first priority is to control who comes to our country, and more importantly, who stays in our country. Restore Britain will not just stop mass immigration, we will reverse it. Every single illegal migrant will be securely detained and then deported. The message will be unrelenting. If you are in this country without our permission, you will be removed. For the foreseeable future, far more people must leave Britain than arrive. If a foreign national is unable to speak English, lives in social housing, claims benefits, refuses to work, fails to integrate, commits crime, or even actively hates our way of life and wishes to do us harm, then they must leave or be made to leave. Restore Britain will make our communities safe again for women.
Again, what he's saying there is matched very closely by all the other right-wing parties. Even the Conservatives say very similar things. Even the Conservatives have come out and said that every single illegal immigrant in the country needs to be deported. I think the difference with what Rupert's saying here is that he's far more likely to actually believe that and not be pursuing this as a populist policy to try and win votes. And that's one of the reasons he seems to be so popular.
Women and children.
There's a lot of genuineness in what he says.
If that means millions go, then millions go. We're constantly told that the economy needs vast swathes of low-skilled migrants. We know that's simply not true. What we need is to get millions of healthy Brits back into work. A radical overhaul of how welfare is delivered. Protecting those in genuine need, but not funding healthy shirkers to live off the back of hard-working men and women. If you can work, you must work. It really is that simple. Restore Britain will be abundantly clear. If you consistently refuse work, then you will lose your benefits. We will punish indolence, and more importantly, we will reward success. We will provide vast economic incentives for men and women to start businesses, generate opportunities, build wealth, and create self-sufficient families. Standing here today on the farm, I know exactly what it means to deal with energy bills, labour shortages, regulation, unproductive paperwork, planning restrictions, tax, and endless uncertainty. The state has definitively become the enemy of the people. Restore Britain will burn away suffocating taxes on work and enterprise. We will slash unnecessary regulation. We will dismantle bloated quangos and the overbearing HR culture. We must crush parasitic Britain. We will restore long-term, stable, logical policy so that businesses can plan, and invest and grow again. But Restore Britain is about much more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about who we are as a nation and who we are as a people. Britain is not just an economy. Britain is not just an idea. Britain is not just a passport. Britain is a nation. Britain is a people, our people. And Restore Britain will never allow that to be erased. We will celebrate our Christian heritage and the identity that built and shaped this country. Responsibility, restraint, forgiveness, duty, and fairness. In short, a high-trust society. That will mean defending our culture. That will mean resisting the relentless creep of radical Islam. That will mean banning the burqa, outlawing Sharia law, blocking cousin marriages, and reimposing our Christian-based rule of law. A Restore Britain government would legislate to ensure that no halal or kosher slaughter on British soil. This is Britain, and we will do things our way. This political party now exists for one reason: to restore Britain, to make it a better, safer, and more prosperous place for British men and women to raise their families. It will be difficult and it will be painful, but I assure you, it is possible. I hope you will consider joining me on this journey and becoming a member of our party. It is our country, it is now our collective responsibility to act. Together, we will restore Britain. Thank you.
Very, very well spoken. Really quite a brilliant piece of media actually there. And in terms of substance and style and ideology, actually, I resonate an awful lot with everything Rupert has just said there. And I resonate an awful lot with everything he's done over the last year or so in Parliament with his rape gang inquiry as well. That video was also actually really well made and quite emotive. Now, what's the reception been? At least on the right, obviously the left will be complaining about this, but the Tories are really celebrating this launch because they hope that they will see this split the right between Reform and Restore and allow the Tories to regain control as the largest right-wing party, which of course they've been incredibly struggling to do. Reform supporters are worried for exactly the same reason. They're worried that this is going to eat into their vote and, again, either allow the Tories to regain their form as the main right-wing party, or worse still, actually allow a left-wing party like Labour or Greens to take control. Now, the online right, people likely watching this video, actually, an awful lot of people I'm likely speaking to right now, are mostly very excited about this, about a party led by Lowe, because he has such an unrelenting history over the last couple of years, especially since he came into his constituency just over a year ago, of being unapologetically right-wing, of not being afraid of any media scrutiny, and frankly, most of the right-wing resonates very, very highly with everything he's said. But of course, this isn't just a question of whether or not we like Rupert Lowe and we like the idea of a party. It comes down to how it's run, how it's governed, how the candidate selection is done, and of course, the polling. Does Restore Britain actually have a real chance of winning an election, or are you going to be throwing your vote away if you put it behind Restore Britain? Well, in this sense, Find Out Now recently ran a poll, very recently actually. You can see the rough results from it here. Yesterday, Rupert Lowe MP launched a political party named Restore Britain. If there were a general election tomorrow, how would you vote in that election? This was a poll run by Find Out Now on literally yesterday, Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, the same day that this announcement by Rupert Lowe was launched. 25% would vote Reform, 20% would vote Green, 15% Labour, 13% Conservative, 10% Restore Britain, and 10% Liberal Democrat. Now that looks pretty insane, right? On the first day of the announcement of a party to be polling at 10%, that's pretty incredible. But I do want to point out that actually this isn't a normal poll and we shouldn't be taking this number at face value. I'm saying both if you support Restore and you oppose Restore, you should at least know the truth about what this poll is. So I actually looked at the actual data. Here's the CSV, the Excel file that was released from Find Out Now with all of this data. And we'll run through it quickly now, and I'll just explain to you what the poll actually was and some problems with it and what we should actually expect Restore Britain's polling to be at the beginning before it starts to pick up speed or die out depending on what happens. So to start off, we have our first question that was asked in the poll here. How likely would you be to consider voting for a political party by Rupert Lowe MP? Now, these here are the outright numbers. 36% put very unlikely, 3% put somewhat unlikely, 5% put somewhat likely, and 6% put very likely. All in all, though, 50% of everyone, and it is broken down by region, gender, and age group, 50% of people put don't know because, frankly, most people don't actually know who Rupert Lowe is. When this is adjusted for taking out the don't knows from this, well, we see 74% said they'd be unlikely to vote for them and 26% put unlikely. That looks a little bit better. Now, that was the first question asked in this poll. How likely would you be to consider voting for a political party led by Rupert Lowe MP? They then asked a second question immediately after. Yesterday, Rupert Lowe MP launched a political party named Restore Britain. If there were a general election tomorrow, how would you vote in that election? And again, we have a big don't know chunk, 28%. We have a 17% of would not vote. And then we have mostly standard, right? 7% put Conservative, 8% Labour. The reason these numbers all look lower on every front is because usually they take out this 28 and 17% here. And that brings us on to adjusted here. 6% put Restore Britain in the end, but adjusted for taking out the would not vote and the don't knows. These are the results we have. 13% Tory, 15% Labour, 10% Lib Dem, 25% Reform, 20% Green, and 10% Restore Britain. So on the surface, that's a pretty incredible result. But there are two, maybe three major problems with this polling. The first is that none of this has been weighted for an actual likelihood of voting. And the anchoring towards Restore with the party name being in the question, obviously. Now, polls, usually the way polling works in the UK, is someone asks you multiple questions. They might ask you, how likely are you to vote in the next election? And if someone says very unlikely, basically you just ignore their answers because they're not going to vote in the election. Another question you might ask is, did you vote in the last election? And if people said that they didn't, well, again, lots of pollsters will just ignore those answers regardless of who they say, because actually on polling, people lie a lot. But they're much more likely to lie about voting in the future elections than they would lie about having voted in past elections. So pollsters usually ignore data from those who haven't voted in the past. This poll had nothing to do with that. So there was no weighting whatsoever trying to work out how likely someone was to actually tell the truth on this poll or how likely someone was to actually vote in a future general election. They literally just took people at face value. And 17% of these people, if we go back to, here you go, Q2 unadjusted, 17% they said they would not vote at the next election. That means 83% said they would vote or they don't know who they'd vote for, but they're not saying they're not going to vote. Now, that aligns with an average of 30 to 40% of people in an average general election in the UK not voting at all. So 17% is obviously far, far lower than 30 to 40%, which is the actual, negative turnout we usually have. That's an example of just one reason why this poll isn't very useful. Now, the second thing is the psychological impact, the anchoring impact of stating both Rupert Lowe's name in the question and Restore UK in the question. Now, this is a massive thing in behavioural economics. It's something I'm genuinely interested in, so I've read quite a lot about it. And my favourite example of explaining choice psychology and bias and things like that is this really, really interesting study, which, forgive me if this looks a little bit off topic, how in-store music increased French wine sales by 330%. You can pause and have a read of what's going on here if you like. But in essence, a supermarket, they played different music in the wine aisle and then they measured what types of wine people were buying. And what the supermarket found out was that when French music is played in the wine aisle, 76% of people will buy French wine. When German music is played in the wine aisle, 73% of people buy German wine. Now, the vast majority of purchasers either said that the music that played didn't affect their choice at all, or that they didn't even notice the music that was being played. But we can see here the evidence is literally, you can't deny this. These people were influenced by the music. They just didn't realize it. That's the degree to which very, very subtle things in our lives can change people's behavior. And that applies very heavily for polling as well. By saying both, the first question here, go back to the data, was how likely would you be to consider voting for a political party led by Rupert Lowe MP, a lot of people are going to say somewhat unlikely or very unlikely just because they don't know who Rupert Lowe is. Most people would literally just put don't know. The second question being then a reinforcement of that first one. Well, by the way, Rupert Lowe just launched a political party yesterday called Restore Britain. How would you vote in that election? A lot more people are going to vote Restore Britain in that polling than you would see under normal circumstances because of the anchoring bias of putting that thought in their head. Now, the third problem here is that no effort has been made to weed out essentially the piss takers here. Now, again, as an example of this, you probably heard a stat, something like in the past, 12 million Americans think that the country is run by lizard people. The reason that's a stat that spreads all over the internet isn't because 12 million Americans don't think the world is run by lizard people. What happened was there was a poll with a multiple choice answer, and one of the options was, I think that lizard people run the world. And a lot of people just chose to click that button as a joke, essentially to destroy the results. On average, you see sometimes as many as 3 or 4% of answers on surveys or polls being placed deliberately wrong just to destroy data and just for a laugh, essentially. Again, normal polling data, it tries to account for this. This one didn't at all. Another example of why this poll isn't particularly useful is Corbyn's Your Party. That was a mess. We all saw that was a mess. It was collapsing. But also, when it was initially launched, it had massive polls coming out saying 10%, 12%, 15% voting intention. And then real polls came out a couple of weeks later and it showed like a 2 or 3% voting intention. What happened there was the exact same flawed methods of polling. A company like Find Out Now, who did the polling for this one here for Restore Britain and Rupert Lowe's party, they rushed within 6 hours notice of this party being announced to get some data out because it's good for their business, because it will get headlines, because a lot of people on Twitter or X or YouTube will see Find Out Now polling, and maybe they'll go and commission a poll from Find Out Now because these were the first people to get that out. It's the exact same thing. They rush to get any results out as quickly as possible, regardless of whether or not the methods they're using are flawed, because they don't really care if the results are accurate. They just care that they're getting mainstream attention. And that's exactly what happened with Jeremy Corbyn's Your Party in the past. I believe that's probably happening with Rupert Lowe here right now. Now, I'm not saying that there's no support for his party, but I am saying this poll here is not reliable, and you shouldn't be taking any data here, as gospel. You should take all of it with a grain of salt. So don't be surprised if in the future, actually, polling for Rupert Lowe goes up or down, because this really is not reliable data whatsoever. Now then, let's stop with the facts and the data and the polling and stuff and just get on to my opinions and what are really my fears with the right wing in our country going forward and the different parties that we seem to be split between. How British politics works in our country historically, under first past the post with our constituency-based system, is there are two main parties and then there are pressure groups, really. The Tories and the Labour, for the last 100 years, they fight for government. They fight for the majorities. Lib Dems, they push for hyper-specific things in local areas. Where I grew up, it was near a town called Chesham and Amersham. I wasn't in that constituency, but I was nearby. They won a seat there, the Lib Dems, on literally a Stop HS2 ticket. Nothing else. That's all they cared on. They were a pressure group running for a hyper-specific issue. In the same way, UKIP were doing the same thing, right? They were never a mainstream party. They were never going to win a majority in any election over the last 2 decades. They were a pressure group run by Farage to push for a referendum on leaving the EU and to push for lower migration. The idea being that if the Tories don't reduce migration, well, some of those Tory voters are going to vote UKIP, not enough for UKIP to win an election, but enough for the Tories to lose an election. And so the Tories have to listen to those pressure groups and adjust their policy. Now, every 100 years or so within our politics, we had the Whigs and the Tories merged together to form the Conservatives. We essentially have every 100 years, right? One of the two main parties on the left or the right messes up so badly, and they ignore the pressure groups so much, thinking that they're the only option, they can't possibly be replaced, that they end up getting replaced by a pressure group. Now, it doesn't happen under normal circumstances. It last happened with Labour taking over as the main left-wing group from the Liberal Party, which happened in the wake of the First World War. 1 million British soldiers dead, a massive event, culture-defining event. My belief is that we're currently undergoing basically the same thing on the right wing today. 15 million immigrants in just over 2 decades. That's the most destructive thing to our country since the Second World War. And it happened largely because the Tories, the right-wing party, betrayed their voters. They ignored the pressure groups. And so now the pressure group reform under Farage has essentially stopped being a pressure group and become a real threat to the Tories, beating the Tories in the polls and most likely to actually win a majority at the next election to oust the Tories and become that mainstream right-wing party. Now, my political view here, it isn't that Lowe or Farage or Reform or Restore is who should be in charge. My political view is actually a lot broader than that. My political allegiance right now is to anyone who can destroy the Tory party and replace them with a new actual right-wing party. That is priority number one. If it is Lowe, then I'll support him. If it's Farage, I'll support him. I'm not tribal between which right-wing upstart party I'm going to support to destroy the Tories. That being said, I think right now Reform has the best chance across our country, across all the different options, to actually destroying the Tories and to flip them out of our two-party system, which, as I said, is my number one priority right now. Farage has a nationwide, household name recognition, right? Reform have 8 MPs and hundreds of councillors. Reform get huge degrees of legacy media attention, far more than any other party, except, maybe Labour, but I think even then Reform probably tip the edge there. I think Rupert, Lowe, Ben Habib, they're only really known in reality in the online right, which just isn't big enough. As an example of that, I think I'm in a bubble. I think we're all in a bubble, and it's really important to recognise that. Otherwise, we end up, again, like the left-wing socialists who think that everyone reasonable thinks that men can chop off their cocks and become a woman. That's not how most people think. We have to leave our bubble if we want to actually take control and influence our country in the right direction. Even some of the biggest channels in this online right space, even like the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, who have been in this space for literally, over a decade. I mean, Sargon of Akkad is such a massive figure in the online right space. Even they probably have, 200,000 unique viewers on their YouTube channel, which aren't even all concentrated in the UK. And a government to win an election needs, at least 15 million votes. When we step outside of this online right-wing bubble, I personally think that Restore Britain is actually more likely to ensure that either the Tory party manage to maintain control of the right in our country, which would be disastrous, or that a left-wing government is able to win the next election, again, which would be disastrous. And my argument for this is basically just speaking to people outside of the political bubble that we're in online. As an example, I have a load of friends currently in the military, right? Some in the Royal Marines, some in the British Army, some officers, some soldiers. And what I see amongst them is that everyone together hates Labour and has a distaste for the Tories. These people are all very, very distinctly right-wing, but most of them don't actually know that Reform is leading in the polls and has led in the polls for a full year at this point. They are prime Reform or potential Restore voters, but they have literally no idea of what's going on in politics whatsoever. The truth is, no one I know outside of this politics bubble knows who Rupert Lowe is or knows who Ben Habib is, or anyone else in this space. And my fear, personally, is that I don't think Restore are going to be able to get mainstream attention, legacy media attention strong enough to actually rise in the polls above where Reform is. I think the most likely outcome from this, and feel free to come back to this video in a year and see if what I said turns out to be right. I think the most likely bad outcome from this is that Reform lose maybe a fifth or a quarter of their vote, which ends up being enough for the Tories to keep, say, 100 seats at the next election. It's enough to make sure that Reform can't form a majority government. We end up with maybe a grand coalition of Greens, Labour and Lib Dem destroying our country. And then maybe the Tories come back in 5 years and they take back control of the right-wing party in our country. And we end up, suffering under another decade or 2 decades of, Tory wets essentially running our country. Now, my dream scenario here is actually Farage and Lowe bury the hatchet. They work something out together. They merge, or they have an election pact, or they end up forming a coalition. I genuinely don't care, but I really want to see cooperation amongst them, because the Tories need to be destroyed and the left needs to be kept out of power. Otherwise, our country is completely screwed. Now, I would really, really encourage everyone watching this to try really hard to reject that political loyalty and to reject that feeling that you have deep inside you of allegiance, because we all have it, it's incredibly natural, but try to reject the feeling of allegiance to an individual or a party, to Farage or Lowe or to Reform or Restore, and vote for who is most likely to destroy the Tories and keep the left out of power, because frankly, nothing else matters. Right now, I think it's a fact that Farage and Reform are most likely to actually be able to usurp the Tories and give us a chance at a right-wing government. So that's where my voting intention and my efforts will focus. If I think that changes, and if I think Restore and Lowe are our best chance at saving the country in the future, I will go there and I'll vote there and I'll canvass there and I'll support them. But right now, I just don't think he's well known enough. And I doubt that he's going to be able to get enough political momentum outside of this online right bubble that we're all in to actually challenge Reform and the Tories and the Lib Dems and everyone else without just splitting the right to vote. So I'll be watching the polls incredibly closely to see if that changes. One of my friends actually is a data scientist who works in political polling. So I'll probably, give Marwan a chat and see how he is and what his views on all of this are. But that's what my personal views are. Now, I know a lot of my viewers worry about Reform and Farage being Tory light or an establishment plant. But again, I really would encourage everyone to understand one really key thing. You and I really are a minority here, right? You're here watching political content on YouTube and I'm making it. 99% of people in Britain are never going to find themselves in your position or my position. And so we need to be very realistic about winning the next election. Otherwise, again, we're no better than these woke left-wing idiots who are trying to force the world to say that men can be women and vice versa. And we would be letting our own delusions of grandeur and our own biases take precedence over what is actually the best course of action for the country. So I'm not staking an allegiance to Reform here. I'm not staking an allegiance to Restore. I really don't care. I just want a real right-wing party who's going to destroy the Tories and to keep the left out of power. Personally, I think Reform is most likely to give us that outcome, even with, some of the questionable things that Tice has said over, mass immigration and how he won't be here in a few decades to care about it and things like that. Even with a bunch of these problems that have come out of Reform, they're not perfect, but I think the likelihood of Restore actually gaining mainstream popularity and winning an election is just so small. I think their best course of action is to be a political pressure group to keep Reform on the right side of politics. And if this had happened, if Lowe had formed this party maybe in a couple of years when the Tory party's already dead, then I'd probably be here supporting them and saying, yes, go on, keep going, keep driving that attention, because it would force Reform to pay attention to that right-wing party. But if we allow ourselves to get caught into tribalism, then those sort of pressure groups that UKIP or the Green Party in the past on the left have managed to be and to use to control and to influence politics in the UK, if you aren't willing to change your vote based on what a different policy is, what a manifesto is, who's in charge, who's being elected, who's joining a party, then you're not able to change politics in the UK. It's that simple. You have to be flexible here, otherwise the country really will suffer. Of course, if you want to watch more of my videos, you can check them out over here. And please like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel, and it helps make sure that my future videos show up on the algorithm for you as well. Keir Starmer is on the brink of losing his job. He's facing a rebellion by 50 of his own MPs who want him out of his job. And I'm happy to say this isn't just some Labour MPs giving away some anonymous comments to The Guardian because, they're not, raising benefits by enough. These MPs sign